Today, we geek out about the Artemis Project. Hey guys, what's going on? This is Lee with Geek City USA here, and today we're going to talk about a game by Grand Gamers Guild called the Artemis Project. Now this is a game in which you are trying to produce the best colony on the moon of Europa, and it's a dice placement game, and we're going to take you over here. I'll give you a very brief overview on how the game is played, and we'll bring you back right here, and I will share with you our thoughts on the game. Alright guys, this is the Artemis Project. So let me start by saying that this is just a print and play copy that I put together based on the print and play that's on the Kickstarter page. All of this is just printed out on cardstock. I laminated it, just cut it out real quick. Nothing real intricate here whatsoever. And these bits have all been pillaged from other games. So keep that in mind when you see this being played here. And definitely check out the Kickstarter page for a better representation of what the game will look like in its final form. So I already have this set up for a two-player game. We have our red player and our blue player. And we've already gone ahead and filled out these two areas, which are, this is the vents and this is the quarry. Now, the vents are what provide you energy through the game, and the quarry gives you minerals. And these numbers here are figured out by rolling one die here per player, and then you just take the total and put that many energy, roll it again, take the total, put that many minerals. Here in the hangers, you're going to flip the number of cards per player -1. So if you are playing a 4-player game, you're only going to have 3 cards here. And over here in the gantry, you are going to draw as many cards as there are players +1. So in this case, 2-player game, so we are going to have 3. You can only have a maximum of 8 buildings on the board to select from. And for turns 1, 2, and 3, or rounds 1, 2, and 3, you're drawing from the ocean stack. And from rounds 4, 5, and 6, you are going to draw from the surface stack. Now up here is your doorstep, and you are going to draw from a bag. Now in this case, I have a bag that I can see through. It doesn't matter, I'm going to not look when I draw. This is just for the example sample gameplay. But you are going to draw 1 per player +2, and you can only have a maximum of 12 in here. So on the next turn, no matter how many are left, because there's only like 4 there right now, I would just draw a total of 4 and put them in here, and they would be available for the next round. Now over here in the Academy, you can only use 1 space in a 2-player game. This only opens up for a 3- and 4-player game, so there can only ever be 1 action taken here on a given round. And here you're basically going to swap out, perhaps if you have a pioneer, for a colonist of a different sort. And then finally here we have the outfitter, and this based on the number that you roll, 1, 2, 3, 4, you would take 1 tool from up over here, and a 5 and a 6 you can take 2. Now up here in the corner we have our event cards. Now there is a letter on these, as you can see, in this case the letter B, and what you do is you are going to set a token on the letter B. So I have this is the event token, and when you go through and as you are doing each action in each round after you place all your dice, this will be activated, whatever it is, and we'll read that when the time comes. And I will make a mess here. Now these 3 areas here use what's called the exposure system, and what you do is, let's just say that we have 2 dice here and 2 dice here. Now somebody placed this here, let's say I place this number 2 on the energy, I would get to take 2 energy with that dice when it's time to resolve this. However, if somebody were to place another die next to me, higher dice, higher value dice go to the right. So for example, if blue started this with a 4 and red wanted to play this too, they would bump the 4 down and red would get first claim to whatever's there. And in the case or in the event that red takes all of what is already there, or there's less than 4, blue just suffers. Blue is going to make out with less than they had hoped for. Now if they ever get nothing, so, and that sounds silly to say that, almost like a double negative, but if there's nothing there to get, let's say red has the red 6 there, and at the end of this, by the time you dole out all that, there's going to be no energy left, then red would get to move on this track here. So in this case, this die is exposed, and this character, or this player, would get to move up on the relief track. And what this does, it's kind of like a catch-up mechanism. It lets you take whatever you land on. So in this case, you know, red would get to move up 1, they would get 2 tools. On their next turn, they would be up here, and they have a choice. You may either take whatever square you've moved into, so in this case I could take 2 energy, or you could take anything that you already went to. So for example, the 2 tools are up for grabs. So by the end of the game, let's say you have a rough game and you are early on at the very end of the relief track, and this 6, didn't get me anything, I could choose to take 1 victory point or a mineral or what have you. I would be able to make my selection from what is available here. And I will move this guy back right now. So that's kind of a high-level overview on how the game's played. Now I'm going to do a quick sample turn or two, and I'm not going to get into the strategy really. I just want to show an example of how the game actually plays. There's a lot of thought that goes into this game, and there's a lot of player interaction, because obviously if you place a low number die here and the other player wants to go higher or lower, that's a hard thing to replicate when you are playing both roles. So you won't really see so much strategy, but I just want to show the mechanics on how all of this actually flows together. All right, so let's start off. I'll collect all these dice back, put them all back on the sheet. All right, so let's kind of move these out of the way a little bit. We'll take both halves of the dice here. We'll roll them together, and we will start with, we'll just start with the blue player, and we can in turn choose to just start placing our dice. Now something to notice here, like these over here in the gantry, the number that you put on it is how much energy, or I'm sorry, how many minerals you're going to pay to buy this building. So in this case, if I were to put 1 and the second player were to come back and put 6, well then I wouldn't, I don't have enough there to pay for this, or their number's higher. And the red player would in turn get this, and they would have to come up with that amount of minerals. Now you don't have to have the enough minerals at this point in the game, because you can still, let's say the red player really wanted this building, so pretty much has just claimed it, but they don't have enough minerals for it. They can now play on this track in the hopes of getting enough minerals. Now over here at the hangars, if you look at this is the expedition here, you see that there's 2 squares here, and then there's a number in the upper right hand corner. Now what this means is in order to complete this or to activate this card, everybody's dice have to total 10 or higher. So in that case, you kind of got to work together in order to get to that total. Now you can place, let's say blue placed that die there that's worth 5. You can also place one of your pioneers there, and that would bring this to a total of 6. But obviously still that's not enough, so you would need to work with your opponent. Now what happens then is whoever places the highest amount gets first choice as to what the reward is. And if you're the only person that plays dice on this, you would be able to take both rewards. And also you'll see here too, I may as well show you now, these buildings have some icons in them. Now this is going to produce resources, in this case either 2 energy or 2 minerals. And it shows 3 different spots. Now you need to have these specific pioneers, or colonists rather, in order to activate this building. So let's say this player bought this building, they would need to end up having the 2 blue engineers as well as 1 of anything. Now there are also some that will give you an extra bonus that, here we go, this one is going to give you 1 energy, plus if you have any engineers in here, you get 1 energy. You get to multiply by the number of engineers you have. So if you were to have 2 engineers here, you would get 1, 2, 3, because 2 times 1, that would give you a bonus. So those are things you have to keep in mind when you're at the doorstep getting workers or at the academy getting them as well. So let's just go ahead through and we'll do some random dice placement. Again, no real strategy, but let's just say that the blue player is going to, let's say that they want to get a couple of the workers or the colonists out of the doorstep here. So if you have a 1 or a 2, you can get 1. If you have a 3 and a 4, you can take 1 or 2. And if you have a 5 and a 6, you could take 1, 2, or 3. So he's going to play the 3 up there because he's hoping to get 2, because he would really like to get an engineer here. Now energy is important because as you are gathering colonists and stuff, you have to have energy for any that are in your shelters. We'll cover that in between the turns. But in that case, just having said that, I'm going to take the red player, we're going to play the 4 right there and try to get some energy. Back to player 1, player 1's going to play right here, and you would start by putting the first player who places their dice on the bottom. So that way, If, for example, the red player places a 5, it would go on top, and the player on the bottom would get first choice of the rewards there. But let's say in this case that the blue player is going to play there, and the red player is going to do so as well. Now that way we know that that's going to be completed. Now the blue player is going to, well, let's see here, because we could try and get a building, but we have higher dice, which means we're going to have to pay more minerals. But the red player has a number of high dice. There's 2 6s and a 1. Well, let's just say we're going to try as this player. We're going to place a, we'll just do a 4 right there. And the red player will in turn, I don't know, no real rhyme or reason. The red player is going to try to get that energy, or those minerals there, which is kind of a jerk move when the blue player is going to obviously need the minerals. So the blue player, currently only having 4, is going to take their 1, and because the 1 is lower, it's going to bump the higher one down. So the blue player is actually going to end up getting the minerals that they need at this moment. Now, even if the red player wanted to play their 1, if you tie, you actually go to the right of the lowest die. So the red player would not be able to bump the blue player down. But in this case, we'll just have the red player go into here and say, hey, I want to get a worker out of there. And the blue player is actually going to play their blue die right there. And then the red player gets final turn with their last 6. And they're just going to go ahead and place it at the doorstep here. Again, no real rhyme or reason. I'm not getting deep into the strategy, just to illustrate how the game is played. Now that everything is placed, we go on to the resolution phase. And we're going to start, here's our marker we're tracking as we go. And we start right here at 1. Now if there were an event here at A, that would trigger first, but there isn't one. So we go here, we're at 1. Now we're going to look here at the hangars, and we see that this has been defeated. And now we have a choice where blue, who was the first to place there, can either choose 2 workers randomly from the bag or 2 victory points. And in this case, I'm going to take for blue 2 victory points. We'll have a different strategy than red. So we'll move up on the victory point track. And then red would get to take 2 workers out of here. So we will go ahead into the bag, and I won't look, and I will just randomly draw 2 for red. And they end up with 2. These are actually, I have black cubes, but these are to be the purple cubes. And these represent the stewards. And they're going to go right into the shelter. Now we'll move this cube back over, and if you look here, hey, we hit the event. So I really should have read this before we set up. But it says here, if you see, all players who do not successfully earn an expedition badge this round lose 3 resources of their choice. Well, that's a problem. But let me start by saying we missed something here, because player 1 and player 2 completed an expedition. They each are going to get one of these expedition badges. So player 1 and player 2 have successfully done that. So here, if we look again, all players who do not successfully earn an expedition badge this round, both did, they lose 3 resources of their choice. We don't have to worry about this, so we're happy. Now these expedition badges come into play when it comes to end of game scoring. You get a bonus if you have the most, and you actually lose victory points if you have the least. And I should touch on too, the tools also let you alter your die roll. So if you roll for every tool, you can adjust your die number up or down based on how many tools you spent. So moving on, we are now at phase 2, or section 2 here, and red player is going to be able to take 4 energy. So 1, 2, 3, 4, which is actually pretty good for this player because they're going to have a lot of colonists in their shelter. So they're going to have to provide energy for them. So we move on here. We'll just collect the die as we go. We are at section 3. So blue player is going to take 1 energy here, or rather 1 mineral, and then blue player is going to get 5 minerals. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And now, if you look, the red player has nothing left, which is a bummer for them. So that goes here, and they get to move up on this track, and they would get 2 tools that they can put to use on the next turn if they would like, or hold on to for the rest of the game. Now I'll move up here to 4. And player blue. Blue player now gets this. So this is going to cost them the 4 energy, or not energy, 4 minerals. So we'll get rid of these minerals and go back to the general supply. And they immediately house this into one of their buildings. And in turn, if they had any colonists in the shelters, they could immediately put them into buildings. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and put this pioneer into here, just so that way I don't have to feed him later on. Let's move now to the doorstep, and we'll start with the blue player. That was a number 3, which lets us take 1 to 2 colonists of our choice. Now it costs us 2 energy per colonist we take here. So we only have 3 energy, so we will only be able to take 1, so we'll get rid of 2 energy, and I'm going to take the blue and put it right into this building here to slowly populate this building. Now the red player has a 6, can take 1, 2, or 3, has plenty of energy to feed them. I keep saying to feed them, but to supply them. But they are only going to take the red one, just because they're already going to have to pay energy because they don't have a building to go into this next turn. So we'll do that, and we'll pay the 2 energy. I can go out there. Then we move on over to here. Here is 6, and that is the academy. And again, you get to trade any one of your colonist types. So I will put a pioneer here, and I will take a blue one, which I should have actually placed them here when I played the die, but that's okay. Okay, and then finally, and we can take this colonist out of the game here. I'm just going to set him off to the side. And then finally we would move here, or actually this happens as you play it. So if I played a die here, I would get those right away. But there's nothing there, so we have completed the first round here. Now we move on to the upkeep phase. Now if you look in the lower left-hand corner of your player boards, it says end of round. This is the upkeep phase. And step 1 says you may perform 1 colonist move or swap. So basically what you can do is if you have a colonist in a shelter or a couple of buildings, you can make exactly 1 swap. So let's say this guy were here and you wanted to trade him out with this guy, and you could based on placement rules, you would be able to. Now, nobody's going to do that because it doesn't make sense for him to, and he has no buildings. And then for step 2, you can activate a fully staffed building. Now, a fully staffed building would have to have full workers. In this case, the blue player only has 2 workers working at this building, so it's not going to produce anything for us this turn. The red player doesn't have any buildings, so they don't do anything at that point either. Now you have to pay energy for each colonist that you have in your shelters. So in this case here, the blue player has no players in the shelter. We don't have to pay any energy. However, the red player has 4 in their shelters. So we are going to get rid of 4 energy from their player board back into the general supply. And then we go ahead and we refresh the game board. And it says here, if you look, and it's small, let me pull one of the other player boards up. It's not gonna look as clear as the final would be, but you know, again, this was just a print and play that was done with an inkjet here. But you start with the base camp, and we are going to get rid of this. Let me move these dice back actually also. But we will get rid of this because this has already been completed, and we will draw as many cards here as there are players, -1, so in this case 1. So we have Race to the Plateau, and we can set this here. Now if you look, this has this icon here, and that's a building. So what you would do is you would draw a building from the appropriate deck of your round. So in this case, we're in the ocean. So we could draw this, and this is going to be the building that the players will be playing for. And in this case, you can get a colonist from the bag if you put 1 of each. So every turn you can get another colonist here, which is actually pretty cool. Now when we go to do the vents, you discard anything that's left here. It goes back to the general supply. And then you're going to roll 1 of these dice per player. So we will roll this, and the resource die say that there's going to be 8 total energy in there this turn. Now if you ever roll, let's say we roll 2 1s, there's always going to be at least 2 per player. I got 7 and there's 8. All right, and then we're going to roll again here as well for the minerals, and we're going to roll 12. I hope I have 12 markers here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Well, I don't have 12 out on the table, but we'll just say that this was an 11. And now here in the gantry, we're going to add 1 building per player. And again, we're still in this stack because this is only the second round. So we're going to reveal this one and then this one here. And then finally the doorstep, we are going to add 1 worker per player plus 2. So we're going to add 4. So here's 1, 2, 3. Oh boy, 4. Well, we got 1 Marine in there and the rest are Pioneers. So that's kind of a bummer. They can at least still power some stuff, but you can always send them over to the Academy to be upgraded to something else as well. So now we can go ahead to the next event card. So let's get rid of this. And these would usually be face down. I just put these face up because there's no art on the back. But if you look here, the event this time is going to be activated when you hit G, and this says each player may play 2 minerals to gain 1 victory point up to 3 times per player. So that makes the stack of minerals pretty interesting, because you can get victory points for them instead. And that goes at G, so that's going to happen at the end there. And now we would each roll our dice, player 1 and player 2, and then start another round. So now I did say when you go on the expedition that if you send 1 of your dice, you can send a Pioneer meeple, or cube rather, as well, and that can increase your die number by 1. However, each of these other colonists also have an individual power. So if you send an engineer and the engineers are blue, that means, like if I were to do that, if it's a successful expedition, then this player also gets to gain any 2 resources in addition to whatever rewards were here. So resources would be minerals or energy. So if this worked and we hit the 8 that we needed, then we could in turn take this and take 2 mineral, 2 energy, or 1 of each, however you want to do it. Now I should also say that the Pioneers, the yellow cubes, are the only ones that you can send multiples of, as long as you can pay the energy to do so. But all of these other ones, you may only send 1 per turn. Now if you were to send a Marine, or the red one, what that would do is, let's say red had, we'll just put the 5 here. This would allow the blue player to decrease the value of an opponent's die roll by 1. So that would go like that. We'll take that and put that guy back. Now finally, if you were to send your dice with a steward, then it would have to be a 1 or a 2. And if it were a successful expedition, and you are the first person to get to choose a reward, you also get a victory point in addition to whatever reward you choose. So just a little extra clarification as to what goes on when you're going on the expedition in the hangars. And now that is a very high-level overview on how the game is played. There are a few other little rule tweaks and everything that's in the game, but I'll let you figure that out on your own there. I just wanted to provide a high-level overview on how the game plays and kind of what it feels like. And there is a lot of strategy in this, a lot of player interaction, and it's hard to put across playing both roles, but I hope that you can see that when you actually play a game with some living, breathing opponents, that there is a lot of brain burning that can happen as you're trying to figure out different strategies. So with that, I'll take you back up top and I'll give you our thoughts on the game. All right, that was the Artemis Project. So let me start by reminding you that that was a print and play copy of the game. So definitely don't judge the final components based upon that. Check out the game components on the Kickstarter, or if you're watching this after the Kickstarter has delivered, check out maybe the Board Game Geek page for some specifics as far as what the final production components look like. Now the presentation on the Artemis Project I thought was very well done. It did an excellent job at conveying the cold moon feel. I thought all of the art was very thematic, and I definitely appreciated it. And the way that it all presented when it was laid out upon the table looked very good. I am a sucker for a lot of bits and pieces with cards or with games, and this had it all. This had cubes, it had cards, it had everything that I was looking for. Now granted, these were my own components that I provided, so they weren't the final components, but I would definitely be, I think, drawn into the game based upon the theme and the art as well as the components in the presentation, or all the little bits. I was definitely a fan of having a lot of bits. For a main mechanic, the Artemis Project utilizes a dice placement system. Now, this is just like a worker placement if you've never played this before, where you're going to roll your dice and you are going to place those in different areas on the board, and they are going to perform based upon their value. So maybe a certain number will get you a certain number of a resource, or will allow you to choose a specific colonist, or is going to indicate what you're going to pay for something, and so on. And I definitely appreciated that because, like I said, I really like worker placement games, and this gives me that feel as well. It was also very interesting the way it utilized an exposure system where you could bump somebody else's dice down. So if you're getting greedy and you're trying to get a lot of a resource and maybe play a 5 or a 6, somebody else can come in there with a 2 and a 3 and completely steal all of the resources from you. And I thought that created a great tension in the game, as well as it left a lot of room for a lot of different strategy, because you never knew if you should go all out for something in the beginning or maybe wait to see what your opponents do. And also, you really never knew if you were going to get anything at all. But there was a nice risk table where if you didn't get anything at all, at least you got something for your nothing that your dice produced. So I thought that was a nice little catch-up mechanic and a nice little feature for something that could have otherwise really created a lot of bad feelings. I think that if that whole mechanism wasn't in the game, it would get extremely frustrating to play your dice and then not get anything in return, and therefore you would suffer greatly with poor dice rolls. But it was very much mitigated by that mechanic. The only negative that I had with the gameplay, and I think it was a really small one because I think it's as much my experience in still being fairly new to the game, having less than 10 plays under my belt, but I sometimes found in some rounds that you ran out of things that you could do with your dice, whereas if all of the energy or the minerals were being taken and you didn't have enough to bid on a building, you couldn't take a person because you didn't have the energy. Sometimes you have dice that you don't really, it doesn't really matter what you pick. But at the same time, I think that a lot of that might be remedied by taking tools and maybe using those dice to take tools to that way have better dice rolls in the future as you manipulate what your rolls are. So that may as much be a learning curve for me as I'm learning the game. And to take that one step farther, I'll also say that the more you play the game, the more you get familiar with what's going on, because there's a lot going on. It's like a worker placement or a dice placement, in that you really have to get a feel for how you're going to balance going out and trying to claim cards or blip buildings, or what workers you're going to take. You have to start to learn how to balance that appropriately. And I feel that as the game went on and the more I played it, the more I got familiar with what I needed to really work for. Like, now is the time for me to get workers for the buildings, or maybe I'm going to kind of store away some energy for my next turn. So a lot of that ebbs and flows with the game. And I'll also say that while I'm on that aspect of this conversation, that every game played quite differently. Some games we were going all out for the buildings, and other games it was a fight sometimes just to get the workers that we wanted to populate the buildings. And so it's always different, and it's always changing up. So then let's use that as a jumping off point for the replayability factor of this game. So the way the game is set up, it's always going to be varied on what buildings are available, what events, and so on. So I definitely feel that every game is a different experience, and it was fresh feeling, and you had to adjust your strategy for each play. So based upon that, I do think that there's a fair bit of replayability to the game. The games didn't seem to run too long, so I think that will also help it get to the table more often than not. Now, as for the audience of this game, I think definitely if you're a fan of the sci-fi genre, you're gonna dig this game just based on the theme. You definitely feel a part of the theme. The way you're gathering the workers and storing them, the colonists in your base and everything, for me, it felt really immersive. And also just the way all the cards read, the event cards and everything, there's a lot of nice flavor text. So if you're a fan of that kind of genre, I definitely think you'll be drawn to this game. Now, also, if you like dice placement or worker placement or engine building games, this has all of that in it. Now, all in all, I really enjoyed this game. I'm a sucker for the science fiction theme, so right there, it kind of has an in to my heart. And I also love the fact that it was worker placement, dice placement, engine building, had all of those things intertwined into one game, and it executed them all very well. Smooth gameplay, fairly easy to teach. It looks like a lot at first glance. Once you go around and teach it, it's a breeze. And based upon that, I would say if you're a fan of the science fiction theme and you like any of those mechanics, I would definitely recommend you go check out this game. All right, guys, that's it. Thanks for hanging out with us. I am Lee with Geek City USA. If you don't subscribe to our videos, please do us a favor and do so, and like and comment as well. Check us out on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter. Love to interact with you guys. Outside of that, thanks for hanging out with us, and we will see you next time.